Okay, so with the changes that we made in the previous lesson, our new hooks-based functional component has all of the functionality of our original class-based React component. So we are all set to replace our former implementation with our new one. Before we begin that process though, I do want to show you that our hooks-based component is about 15 lines shorter than our original class-based component. Now, part of that is due to prettier, and part of that is due to our own things like line breaks, but it still serves to demonstrate the purpose that this approach on the right is a little bit shorter. And that is a pattern that you will tend to discover fairly consistently when comparing class-based components versus hooks-based functional components. The functional variants just tend to be a little bit leaner and meaner, and that is one of the selling points of hooks. Another advantage of this approach is that the code is a little bit more, what I would say, traditional basic JavaScript. We're just dealing with regular functions, regular constants, things like that. You don't have to know class declaration syntax or things like inheritance right here with the extends keyword, or class property declaration syntax, or the this keyword, or instance methods and binding, right? The concepts that we have here are more traditional, vanilla, kind of meat and potatoes JavaScript. And I think that's one reason why hooks tend to be popular. I think they're just easier to introduce to people who are brand new to JavaScript compared to all of the background knowledge that you need to have in order to understand what's going on in this file. Okay, so with that said, before we proceed, another thing I want to do is I still have this random string of test@email.com here for my starter state for the email state. I'm going to change this back to an empty string just so the input starts out empty. I think we just populated this with that value for some example way long ago, some lessons ago, but we obviously want the form to start out empty. So I'm going to save that, and then what I'm simply going to do is cut and paste the code right here into my app.js file. So now we have our hooks-based component as the central app.js component. So I'm going to remove my opened file right here. Here in VS Code, I'm going to delete my app with hooks.jsx file. So just delete that completely and move it to trash. And then in our index.js file, we originally were rendering both of our components. We no longer need them, and we do not need our app with hooks one because that one is now living in our regular app.js file. So I'm going to remove that import. I'm going to remove app with hooks right here. I'm going to remove the React fragment because we no longer need it. So once again, we are rendering a single app component, and that component is our new hooks-based React functional component. And now as I navigate back to the Chrome web browser, we can see that everything is still working on the page, and when I refresh it, everything is working just fine. And we could see, for example, in login mode that if I give a sample email address like test@email.com and a password like password, doesn't matter, and I click login to account, it says you are now logged in. So that means a whole bunch of different features are still working. That means our change functions are running. That means we are correctly updating the respective pieces of state, such as our email state, our password state. When we click on the button, we are triggering our form submission, which is also updating our message piece of state. So all of the original functionality is still working exactly as expected, but now we have a hooks-based React functional component. Once again, this is the new paradigm. This is the new way to build your components in React. There's nothing necessarily wrong with class-based components, but hopefully you now see the advantages of what hooks can do for us, and also kind of the simplicity. It's kind of a simple syntax to get used to. Keep in mind as well that useState is just one example of a hook. It is the hook that we use for state management, but it demonstrates the basic principle of what hooks are. They are just functions from the React library that allow us to emulate existing React features from class-based components, but now in a functional component ecosystem. So useState is what we use for state management, for data that changes over time that affects our component, whether it be in the actual display or some kind of conditional logic, it doesn't matter. State is just data that changes over time, and the useState hook helps us manage that in a functional component. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.